Hello and welcome to this brief series of videos designed to help you, the absolute beginner, get up to speed quickly with JavaScript. And we'll do this by discussing the fundamentals of what you need to know in order to write your own interactive web pages and create native Windows 8 Metro style applications. My name is Bob Tabor and I typically talk about C#, Visual Basic, ASP.NET, and other .NET related topics on my website www.learnvisualstudio.net. However, Channel 9 asked me to record this series of videos because JavaScript is a programming language that, as a software developer, you simply cannot ignore. I should know, I tried to ignore it for like 15 years. I actually was at the conference in San Francisco where, back in December of 1995, where JavaScript was first demonstrated and announced. And at that time, it seemed like a great idea, but quite frankly, it looked kind of like a novelty. And subsequently, it was ignored by most web developers, myself included. But over time, web browsers matured, users' demands for applications inside of the web browser became more sophisticated, and JavaScript emerged as the premier programming language of the future. Not just for web pages, but for building real applications. In fact, in September 2011, Microsoft announced JavaScript would be treated as a first-class citizen for building native Windows applications alongside of C++ and C#. So it's no longer just a way to spice up web pages. Just about every week, somebody out there uses JavaScript to do some amazing things. My favorite is the guy who recently ported the old 3D first-person shooter Doom using JavaScript. Furthermore, JavaScript has moved merely from being inside of a web browser only to also being used on the web server for application logic, for access to shared resources like files and a database server, and so on. So this series of lessons is designed to help an absolute beginner understand the environment, the language, and the conventions of JavaScript in, hopefully, an approachable manner. If you're already an experienced software developer, well, frankly, this series might move a little bit slow for you. Honestly, there's probably some better ways out there to spend your time. I want to be clear and thorough for the student who's coming to JavaScript as a first programming language, and so we're going to take our time getting to our destination. So here's what I want to accomplish in this series. We're going to start off, first of all, by showing you how to create a simple JavaScript example using a simple programming environment that will duct tape together Notepad and Internet Explorer. And then I'm going to also show you the free powerful tool from Microsoft, Visual Web Developer Express Edition, to help author HTML pages and JavaScript as well, and some of the advantages that we get by using a free tool. We're going to examine other free tools like those that are built right into Internet Explorer to help us debug our JavaScript code, as well as some other tools that are available over the internet at large. Next, I'm going to walk you through the most important language features of JavaScript. These features appear in most programming languages, things like variables and operators and expressions, decision and iteration statements, scope, functions, and so on. JavaScript is a very small programming language, but it's incredibly malleable and flexible. We're not going to get too complex in this series. However, I keep learning things about JavaScript just about every single day about how to combine these simple language elements in new and interesting ways and to do some things that are fairly complex. Next step, I'm going to introduce the idea of the document object model, or rather the DOM. So when your web browser downloads a web page and it tries to parse through all the HTML in that web page, it'll start creating a series of objects in the computer's memory. Each object represents an HTML element, as well as its content, its attributes, and so on. So you can use JavaScript to access or change the DOM in response to events that occur on the web page. So for example, a user may click on this or he hovers over that. So part of the challenge then is learning how to respond to those events and how to access just the parts of the document object model that you need to accomplish what you want to accomplish, to show or hide some text, to add new elements to the document object model dynamically, to inspect data that the user entered into an HTML form field before sending it onto the server, and so on. So then we're going to talk about jQuery, which is an open source library of functionality written entirely in JavaScript that makes things about JavaScript easier. It smooths over the rough spots of JavaScript. For starter, when working with multiple web browsers of various implementations of JavaScript, again, it smooths over the different implementations between vendors. There are other features that make JavaScript more powerful and simpler as well. Microsoft has fully embraced this library, including in some of their software development programming environment templates, and even contributing to the project. Frankly, I don't know anybody who isn't already a serious web developer who is not using the jQuery library. So it's important that you understand what it is as soon as possible. Reliance on jQuery isn't the only popular practice in JavaScript programming. I want to make sure that you're aware of a few common practices and conventions that have been developed by the web development community. While there's no single quote-unquote right way to include JavaScript functionality into your application or web page, there are definitely a few wrong ways, and there are some best practices that make things a little bit easier long term. So I want to introduce you to several of these ideas so that you can avoid making the mistakes that will cause well, web developers, if not small children, to laugh at you in the streets, okay? Some books and articles on the web unfortunately demonstrate practices that are frowned upon. For example, how to include JavaScript in a web page. There's at least 3 different ways to do it, but only one that most developers agree is the best way to achieve this, and we'll talk about that soon. So in the past, JavaScript has been used for a few important activities in the web browser. Just to name a few, it's often been used to show and hide text, images, or other HTML elements in the web page based on some interaction between the user and the web page. It's been used to apply styling to HTML on the fly. JavaScript has been used to validate the entries of users into form fields embedded on the web page as a first line of defense before sending data up to the web server for processing. JavaScript has been used to animate elements on a screen, and this could include graphics that are moving around the page, or content that's sliding into place, or color or opacity transitions and things of that nature. And I've already referenced how entire games can be loaded into the web browser, like Doom or Angry Birds. JavaScript can be used to communicate with a web server, exchanging data back and forth without the need for a complete HTTP post or get operation for the entire web page. We'll be demonstrating that much later in this video series. This has become one of the most vital features of JavaScript and jQuery to make pages smarter and more responsive. So HTML5 and CSS3 have reduced the need for JavaScript to be used in some of these scenarios, quite frankly. Some animations, some form validation, these are things that have been taken care of by HTML5 and CSS3. Still, if we want to move beyond the basics, we're going to need to understand JavaScript. At the very least, if you try to copy some code from an article online or in a book, you should be able to at least look at it and understand how it's working and know what to touch and what to leave alone. So hopefully this series of lessons can get you further along in your journey to learn JavaScript and really get it under your belt. And so that's really the main goal in this video series, as the old expression goes, to give you enough rope to shoot yourself in the foot with. I'm really just kidding. What I really hope is that this fundamental series will give you enough of a foundation that you can make good decisions and decipher other people's JavaScript code so that you can safely modify it and include it in your own web pages. And perhaps as you grow as a JavaScript developer, you can write large passages of JavaScript on your own without using any code snippets. Hopefully this will be one of the first steps that you take to learning JavaScript or learning even more about JavaScript and programming concepts. Alright, so before we get started, the videos embedded on the webpage on Channel 9's website are presented somewhat smaller than how I originally record them, which is high def, 1280 by 720. I'm going to increase the font size of the text that I type into Notepad. However, if the text seems obscured or difficult to read, it might have to do with the speed of your internet connection and how the streaming video works. In that case, you may want to download the videos to your computer first and watch them there instead of trying to stream them. Also, you should be able to watch the videos full screen. There's a little icon in the player bar that would allow you to see the videos full screen if the text is a little bit too small for you to read. So take a moment, become familiar with the environment, see where the download links are for the videos near the player where you're currently watching this video, or take a look at the player bar to see how you can expand to full screen and then get back into the browser viewing experience. Also, just want to let you know that I have a folder with all the code files and graphics that I'm going to use for this series of videos. You can see it's here on my desktop, and it's filled with a number of HTML pages, JavaScript, some CSS, some image files, and some other data files as well. Make sure you download it. I'll explain the naming convention as we go throughout the series, but you could probably tell already that I'm matching up the file number with the video lesson number. So for example, this file would belong to the 15th video in this series of videos. Finally, you are in control of the viewing experience. To get the most out of this or any video series, you should become an active learner. Type the code in yourself with your own hands to build muscle memory and to force your brain to understand what it is the speaker is attempting to explain. Pause, rewind the video, ask questions in the comments area below this video. Active learners learn more quickly. Commit the time and you'll have this under your belt in no time at all, I promise. Okay, so we're going to get started with some baby steps in the next lesson. I want to encourage you to get a plan in place to follow along and enjoy the process of learning. You can do this. It's fun and it's exciting, and we're going to get started in the next lesson. I'm excited for you. I hope you're excited too. I'll see you there. Thank you. Hi, I'm Bob Tabor with LearnVisualStudio.net. Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to start off by writing just a tiny bit of HTML5 and JavaScript code. Nothing fancy or complex at all. I just want to show you, first of all, where you can add JavaScript into your web pages. And then secondly, I want to kind of get into the workflow of writing a little code and then seeing what the result is inside of a web browser, inside of Internet Explorer. And then what we want to do is talk about what to do whenever the JavaScript examples that we're typing in and demonstrate in this series, for example, they simply don't work and you really don't know where to turn. There are actually some tools that are built into Internet Explorer that I want to demonstrate briefly that will help you find some clues so that you can kind of solve the problem on your own. Of course, if you ever get stuck, please feel free, as we mentioned in the previous video, to ask questions in the comments area below each video, and I'll answer them if I can. So once we finish this lesson, we're going to take a closer look at the examples that we write here, and I'll explain what's going on kind of behind the scenes. Now, the code is so simple that we're about to write that I'm willing to bet that you're going to be able to figure this out on your own before we even run the example without any explanation from me whatsoever. But I still think that it's beneficial as we're getting started that we provide some background information to help get you on a solid foundation, and then we can move forward from there. So our game plan in this lesson is, first of all, to set up a folder where we can save our work. We're going to set up some shortcuts in our development environment, so in our little Notepad and Internet Explorer development environment. Then we're going to create an HTML template, and we're going to make sure that it validates by using an HTML5 validator, and then we're going to start writing some JavaScript code. So here we go. Remember, pause the video, rewind it if you need to, but whatever you have to do, make sure that you follow along closely at first, because to get the most benefit out of this series or any series of videos, or even a book or what have you, you need to follow along and get your hands dirty and actually type in the code yourself. It's hands down the easiest way to learn. So as you can see, I am starting off with a relatively fresh installation of Windows 7. I also have Internet Explorer 9.0 installed. However, what I'm about to show you would work regardless of the operating system that you have currently installed. It'll work with just about any version from any web browser vendor. But still, if you want to follow along closely with me, then I highly, highly recommend that you have the most recent version of Internet Explorer installed. Alright, so what we want to do is start by creating a space for to save all of our work, and we're going to just right click on the desktop and select New Folder, and we're going to call that folder C9JS underscore fundamentals. Alright, fundamentals. There we go. And the C9 is for channel 9, the J is for JavaScript, and obviously the fundamentals is for fundamentals. And so my intent here is to save all my work here, and then once I'm finished, I'm going to allow you to download all the work, all the HTML, the JavaScript files, the cascading style sheet files, any image images or any other resources that you'll need in order to follow along and complete these examples. So you can see where you can download that. If you haven't been able to find it, I actually saved the link to the JavaScript Fundamentals series here in my web browser. And so here is the channel9.msdn.com/series/javascript-fundamentals-development-for-absolute-beginners. All right. And if you go to the very first video in this series, the series introduction, and you scroll down just a little bit, you can find download the entire series source code here. And I also caught my eye just as I was going there. You can also download it from this page as well. All right. So make sure you download that and have that handy so that if a code example doesn't work for you, you can take a look at the code that I've typed in and compare it to the code that you've typed in, and then make the appropriate changes so that you see whatever I'm seeing here. All right. All right, so the next thing we want to do is configure Notepad. I'm going to go ahead and just in the search bar type in Notepad. And I've already taken the liberty of doing this, but I want to show you what I've done. I went to Format, Font, and I changed the font to Courier New Bold 18. And the reason I've done that is because in the past, some people, when watching the videos that I've created on Channel 9, they've had some issues when viewing the code that I'm typing in. It comes up really small or really garbled. And so by changing the font size, I'm hoping that I'm helping you see a little bit more clearly even in that small display window, because I'm recording this in a high def format, but it's kind of compressed a little bit smaller onto the Channel 9 webpage format. So hopefully you'll be able to see when I type in the word "this is a test." If you cannot see this, then it's possible that streaming on Channel 9 is simply not going to work for you for this series. You may want to download the videos locally. There should be some hyperlinks off to the left-hand side of this little viewing area, or I guess it's your right-hand side. It's made available for you in several high-def formats. Just download locally and then watch it from there. That's probably the best course of action. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is create a little HTML5 template so that we don't have to type in the same boilerplate HTML5 code every time we sit down to create a new JavaScript example. So let me just say this at the outset. Nothing I do here should confuse you. If you see some HTML markup that you don't recognize, or if you don't already have a firm grasp and understanding of HTML5, then I want to encourage you to watch the HTML5 and CSS Fundamental series that I also created, also available for free here on Channel 9. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with an open angle bracket exclamation mark doc type HTML. All right, and then I'm going to create an opening and closing HTML tag, and then an opening and closing head tag, and then an opening and closing body tag. And then the next thing I want to do to make sure that this document will actually validate is add a title. And we'll just make a dummy title for now that will, hopefully I'll remember to change every time that we use this template. So JavaScript example. And I don't have to do this for validation, but just to make sure that all of the examples kind of look the same, I'm going to add a h1 tag with the same dummy text that hopefully I'll remember to change for every single example. All right. So now this is the important part. We want to file, save as, and we want to change the save as type to all files. We also want to make sure that we are going to save into this c9js_fundamentals folder. So if you're not already there, navigate to it on your desktop, all right, by using the little favorites icon, or navigate through however you normally would, and make sure that you're saving into that target directory, making sure that the save as type is all files. We're going to type in template.html. And so if we forget this and we leave it as text documents, what will happen is that it will append a .txt on the end of that file name, and it will not be able to open up in Internet Explorer. Instead, it'll just open it back up in Notepad, and that's not what we want. So we want to make sure that save as type is all files, and the file name is template.html, and I'm going to click save. And then let's let's open up our C9JS underscore fundamentals folder and make sure that we have our template there. You can see it recognizes it as an HTML document, which is perfect. And just to make sure this all works correctly, let's double click it and open it up in Internet Explorer. Seems to work just fine. Awesome. All right, so the next order of business then is to validate this HTML that we wrote. And there are a number of different validators out there that are available for HTML5. And the reason we're doing this is to make sure that if we've made any mistakes, we correct them here in our template so that we don't have to keep fixing that problem every time we use the template to create a new example. All right, fix it once. So the favorite my personal favorite HTML5 validator is HTML5.validator. You see I've visited it a couple times already. HTML5.validator.nu. All right, in fact, I love it so much that I'm going to go ahead and add this as my home page. So I'm going to go to Tools, Internet Options, and on the General tab, I'm going to use the Use Current button in order to create this home page. Click OK. So now, if I open up Internet Explorer again, it'll open up to HTML5.validator.nu. In this case, I want to change the validator input to a text field, and I'm going to delete all this boilerplate HTML5. Instead, I'm going to open up my template, and I'm going to hit Control A on my keyboard and Control C to copy onto the clipboard, and then Control V to paste it back into the validator. And I'm going to click Validate. Now, as you can see, I get a warning that the character encoding of this document was not declared. Ideally, you would add a meta tag char set equals UTF-8, but it's not necessary. It's just a warning. Underneath that, I get the document is valid HTML5, a little green box appearing underneath. Now, I just want to make sure that at this point, you're not seeing a pink box where I'm looking at this green box, all right, below this section here, okay? If you see a pink box, that means you have errors and you're going to need to make some fixes. You should stop the video, rewind it, watch what I've done, or download, again, the code from the C9JS fundamentals folder that we talked about a little bit earlier. Make sure that you type in the template, the HTML5 precisely, and that's probably the first admonition that I have as we get started here. Software development and web development in particular is an exercise in preciseness. When we communicate in the English language, we rely on the other person that we're communicating to kind of fill in the blanks if we leave out a detail or two, if we don't use correct speech, or perhaps when we're typing up an email, we may misspell something or we forget the punctuation, whatever the case might be. We rely on the other person to fill in the blanks and figure out what we're trying to say, right? But in software development, that is not the case. You have to be precise. And fortunately, there are tools that'll help you be precise. For example, this validator tool, we're going to look at something that's built into Internet Explorer 9.0, the F12 developer tools, in just a little bit to help us be precise and get the results that we're expecting. Okay, so at any rate, let's go ahead and move on. I'm going to close this down, and I'm actually going to close the template as well. And now we're going to start over from scratch in Notepad. So I'm opened up Notepad. I'm going to open up my C9JS fundamentals, and I'm going to drag the template file into the open Notepad, which will copy the contents into a new Notepad window, and immediately we'll want to change the name because you can see we're actually working on the template.html page. So we want to save as, make sure save as type is set to all files, and that we're targeting the C9JS underscore fundamentals folder. And here I want to type in hello world in order to create our first JavaScript example. And so what we'll do is we're going to modify the template by adding an attribute, the onload attribute. We'll talk about what that does in just a moment. But you can see I made a space after the body, typed in the word onload, all lowercase, used the equal sign, and then I'm using double quotes. You could use single quotes here, but by convention throughout the series, I'll use double quotes whenever assigning a property to the attributes that we defined inside of our HTML5. Inside of those double quotes, I'm going to type in the word alert, and immediately followed by an opening and closing parenthesis. In between the parentheses, I'm going to type in two single quotes. Inside of those single quotes, I'm going to type in the word hello, space, and then world, exclamation mark. All right. Then I'm going to simply save my work. And now what I want to do is go back to our Windows Explorer and double click the hello world.html file. And you can see a couple of things happen here. First of all, we see this little error message at the bottom. Internet Explorer restricted this web page from running scripts or ActiveX controls. I can click Allow Block Content, and when I do, we see a little alert box pop up with the word Hello World. And I'm going to click the OK button. And we have now successfully created our first JavaScript program. So let's get back to that little message that we saw. I'm going to shut down Internet Explorer and then double click on hello world.html again and look at this little message. What's going on here is that Internet Explorer is trying to protect you, the user of this computer that you're currently working on, from potentially malicious scripts that are contained within the web page. So whenever you view a web page from your own local hard drive, it's automatically running with an elevated set of permissions or privileges. And therefore, the web page and the script that you write has available to it greater access to the resources on the computer than, say, a file that was downloaded from the internet, like a normal HTML page that you go to any website to view. And so Internet Explorer warns you and says that you should be aware of this. It says this could potentially be harmful. Are you willing to execute this script because the person who created it could be trying to do something malicious, delete files, rename files, load files on your computer? So in our case, we know what we're doing here, right? We're not going to try and delete files or overwrite files on our hard drive, right? So in our case, I want to temporarily turn this setting off. Now, if you're comfortable with turning this message off for this entire video series, then awesome. If you're not, that's fine too. You'll just need to click that Allow Block Content button every single time that you want to test your JavaScript code. Now, in my case, that gets a little bit annoying, so I'm going to change this on my computer. Feel free to follow along if you want to. I'm going to go back to the Tools menu, click Internet Options. I'm going to go to the Advanced tab at the very right-hand side. I'm going to use the scroll bar here to bounce all the way to the bottom and then bounce up just a tiny bit up to the security section here in our settings. In Internet Explorer 9.0, you'll see that Allow Active Content to run in files on my computer is the second option. I'm going to go ahead and check that. And if you're using a different version of Internet Explorer, it's possible that you might need to look for the same entry in a slightly different position. Furthermore, if you're using a different web browser vendor, then you have to take different steps. Or heck, you may not even see a warning message at all. Just keep that in mind. Be aware of the fact that Internet Explorer has this extra step of security integrated into it. All right, now I'm going to click OK. I'm going to close the web browser down and try this one more time. Hello World, double clicking, and we can see automatically the alert box is there with Hello World. We don't get the warning. We're in good shape. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK and shut this down. So take note that this is the very first way that you've learned how to add JavaScript onto a web page, by embedding it directly in line using an attribute of a given HTML tag, in this case the body tag. Now eventually we're going to talk about all the techniques that you can use to add JavaScript into your web pages. But let's try a second example that's a bit more practical. And so I'm going to go through the same exercise of opening up a fresh version of Notepad and then dragging our template and dropping it into the open area here. I'm going to save this as, changing the save as type to all files and making sure the target folder is c9js_fundamentals. And this time we're going to call this c9js_02.html. And so that convention is just C9JS, like we talked about earlier, channel 9 JavaScript underscore. And since this is the second lesson in this series, I'm using that 02 to denote which file this, which video this file is associated with. The second video in this lesson, in this series. All right, so it should show up here, and it does. Great. And so now what we want to do is, first of all, we're going to add some more HTML to our body section. I'm going to add an input type equals text, ID equals my uppercase T for text, uppercase B for box, and then below that I'm going to type in input type equals submit, value equals click me, and then I'm going to add an on click equals, and then empty double quotes for now. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. All right, so